Great, right. A very quick introduction before we dive into these three stories. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Maja Varsambrogi. That's two different kinds of surnames in there, one being Swedish and one being Italian. I'm the one who has the pleasure to host the webinar today. And this is in my capacity as globally responsible for our intercultural services at BBI Communication. And in my role, I have, I would say, the immense fortune to work with our different BBI locations all over Europe, to support our many intercultural experts who are based worldwide, and just to help deliver and develop our services to clients all over the world. Personal note, I mentioned to you two of the countries that are connected to me. I am originally Swedish. I've spent half of my life living outside Sweden, currently in Italy, since quite a few years back. I would say most of my life, if I'm talking about my life, most of my life I've spent trying to create connections across cultures, promoting the benefits of diversity, at least I would say my whole professional life. So that's where I'm at, and this is the reason why I'm hosting the webinar today. Very quickly about me, but then I'll just mention one or two words about BBI Communication because we are the host of the webinar today. So I'd say over 30 years, we've helped thousands and thousands of organizations to be successful in an international environment, in a culturally diverse environment. And we do this through our two main services, intercultural competence development, that we're here to talk about today, and language training, and through our offices in...
Dat goed, hè? Maar dan moet ik even...
the Netherlands. I will ask everybody to mute your microphones. So through our offices in the Netherlands, Sweden, Spain, and Finland, and then our network of consultants across the globe, we do this work worldwide. So on the right, you'll see just an example of when our services are requested by our clients. So we're called in to support the global mobility world, when people are working in culturally diverse teams or leading them, or international organizations as a whole. And we help them to, let's say, recognize, understand, and manage, but also benefit from cultural diversity. And this is what today's webinar is all about. And it's part of a series of webinars that we are running at BBI Communication this autumn. These are all webinars that are highlighting how international organizations can be more culturally inclusive. Last webinar, for those of you who were here, we talked about the changing labor market with a specific focus on work-related migration and what that means for the people moving and also the people receiving, and why intercultural and language skills are important in that context. Today's webinar is slightly wider. We are looking at how intercultural competence is important in several situations, not only when people move across cultures, but really, and especially today's world, when they are collaborating and communicating across cultures. And this is often done virtually. These days, I think a situation which is not intercultural is quite rare. So we're called in to support organizations in all these kinds of settings. And that is why you guys are here today to listen to stories about exactly that. And that brings me to today's webinar. So what I've done is that I've invited three of our intercultural consultants to share stories of really concrete ways that intercultural competence can be used to support in these different environments, to support international talent and to create more inclusive teams and organizations. So we've got Neil Mason, who will be our first storyteller, and he'll talk about cultural integration of international talent. We've also got Annika Berge-Konga, who will share a story about supporting leaders of culturally diverse teams. And then at the end, we've got Sonsoles Morales, who will share with us how she supports international HR teams and how she helps them leverage cultural diversity. So hopefully these three stories will give you a taster of what we do at BBI Communication really on a daily basis. What we'll also try to make sure is that from each story, you'll get some practical tips and takeaways so that you can hopefully apply them in your own situation, in your own work. Right, that's enough of me talking. So we're going to get started with the first storyteller, and that is Neil Mason. And we will start by looking at what happens when international talent relocate to a new culture, find themselves in a completely new culture. And so Neil will tell us about how he supports specifically the cultural integration of international talent relocating to Portugal. Now, Neil, I will hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you, Maya. Great to be here this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Neil, and I've lived in Portugal for over 30 years. I moved there in 1989, so to the north, particularly to the city of Porto. And so my expertise with this contract number of people that they've relocated to the new offices, plus recruited people from locally. So it's quite a different kind of situation. It's not just one person relocating and coming to live in a culture where they have to kind of learn the ropes and fit in. It's quite a large group of people that have to do that. I want to take you through who our trainees or our clients are, the ones that we've been helping over these last months. Two focuses: what we do in intercultural intelligence in work, what fits their work context, and also, because we take a holistic approach, what happens with their families as well. And you'll see this beautiful picture of Porto. Maya, can you show us the next picture? I took these pictures last month with my iPhone just to show that it's not just professional pictures. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. So very, very easy in some ways to adapt to certain things in the culture. And I think most of the people who relocated have actually been lucky because they've come just as the good weather is coming. So they're able to explore, get to know the city quite well. Can you show us the next picture, Maya? In 20, and the next one. In 2022, Porto actually won the prize as Europe's leading city break. I saw there was somebody there from Oman. The prizes were announced in Muscat last year, and Porto won the best destination for 2023. 2022, 2023. So if you get a city break, if you're fancying getting to know the city, then I would really, really recommend it to you. Next one, Maya. This is down by the river, and you see these figures of these kids. They just love jumping in the water and asking tourists to give them some money so that they will jump. And I was thinking of intercultural, relocating, going to live somewhere new is just like jumping off a bridge into the river. It's safe, but it helps if you know what you're doing and where you can jump. Obviously, these kids, you don't want them jumping on the boats that are going under the river as well. Maya, next picture, please. And so, as I said, the company has a number of people who are being relocated. We have people from Australia, the UK, Greece, Ukraine, France, Brazil, Italy. I think the majority are French. There are a number of French, but there are these other nationalities as well. So we've been training them sometimes as married couples and sometimes individually. Some have moved with families. I know there was one person whose family, her daughter just went to study in the USA, so she's basically there just with her husband. And then there are other people with young children, age 1, age 7, 8, 9. And then there was one couple that has 2 teenagers, 15 years old twins. And so these different family situations bring with them different challenges. And one of the first things that happened with one couple, the Australian British couple, as we were talking through weird and wonderful things about the differences in culture. They asked me how they could get to know their neighbors, because they found it difficult. They went and knocked on their neighbors' doors, introduced themselves, and it was very interesting to see that it's very typical for them in their cultures to do that, but the Portuguese culture doesn't do that. People who will be neighbors for years maybe don't know each other, and they're a little bit backwards in wanting to get to know who lives next door, or who lives upstairs, or who lives downstairs. And for this couple, you know, it had just been, it hadn't made sense to them how they could. They just wanted to make contact with the people next door. And so we discussed about why those things happen, what would be typical in Portuguese, how do you make friends? And so this was just something for me that was interesting to watch as well. Another little thing that happened with the couple from the Ukraine and Greece. This was quite funny, because as we were concentrating on Porto and their adaptation and so on, we also actually discovered some things in them as a couple with their own cultural differences between themselves, which we were able to discuss, which was, I think, an extra bonus. They learned about each other, learned some interesting things as I was sharing some of my knowledge about things in the two cultures. And then the wife would turn to the husband and say, "Really, is that true?" And so they figured out some of the things between themselves as well. There's one of the, I think it was the British guy, who really loved an illustration that I gave of a concept that I call the banana paradigm. The banana paradigm is all these little differences in different cultures. Some people peel a banana one side, some people peel it the other side. And so he used that quite a lot for his, with his colleagues, to explain what was going on. Next slide, Maya. Maya. Yes, thanks. So at work, obviously we focus with some of the work dynamics. We have this intercultural, international team, different countries that have relocated to Porto as a group. So each one of those is adapting to a new culture, to a new place of living, a new place where they have their kids in school and so on. But they've recruited locally as well. So there are a lot of Portuguese, a lot of Brazilians that have been recruited. And so we've focused on little things that may be different in those cultures, but not just the foreign worker adapting to the new context. In this context, everybody is adapting to something new. All of the foreign workers that are arrived are adapting to a new culture and a new city, but also the new workers that have come into the company are also adapting to a new culture, a new company, a new way of working, a new leadership team. And so we figured that within the context that they're working, their responsibility is not only for themselves to adapt and to learn about the culture, but actually to help their colleagues who maybe didn't have any cultural training to navigate those situations as well. And so we've had some situations which have come up with that. Maya, if you want to go to the next one, please. The majority of new recruits that are being brought into the company are Portuguese or Brazilian. There's a spattering of other nationalities that live locally as well. But mainly they would be Portuguese and some Brazilians. And so there are differences and similarities between Portuguese and Brazilians, which the other foreign workers needed to understand a little bit of the dynamics that they might see in their teams, and help their teams to navigate those situations, help their teams to navigate possible little conflicts that would happen. There was one situation where I think it was a French leader that had said to me that he has a Portuguese subordinate in his team who expected the Brazilian to change the way that he speaks and change his language because, well, now you're in Portugal, so you have to adapt. So we discussed about what is adapting. Are we in Portugal? Is this a Portuguese culture? Is there a majority culture which should be adopted? And in this situation, we saw that no, it's the company culture. It's multicultural, intercultural, and so the leader has to figure out a way of helping the Portuguese to navigate these differences and accept that it's not just the way that they work, but the way that their other colleagues work as well. Maya, next one. as I said, we're taking a holistic approach. And I think it is essential, really essential, to consider families and consider kids, particularly as you move to a new culture. And I'm glad that we've been able to do this. The spouse has been able to take the cultural profile test. We've been able to talk in the sessions about each person in the family and they're adapting. We have a family that has a very young child. So where can they live? Where would be a good place to live? Where the creche is? What will travel look like to work? Then we have those who have their kids in maybe an international school and they need to live near an international school. How are they going to get around? What is safe? What isn't safe? Because the whole thing can fall down. The whole relocation for an individual can break down if there are problems and issues with the family. Imagine you've got a 15-year-old and that 15-year-old has been uprooted. The family's made a decision. They didn't make the decision. They're living in a new country. They're living in a new culture. And then going through their teenage years and they decide that they don't like it or they're having difficulty. And so even this will affect your work. So if you have say maybe a French national working in Portugal with kids in a French school in the city of Porto, trying to figure out all the school things, having a hard time at home and then coming into work. And there are 3 other colleagues that have similar situations. And so they're all adapting to that, all dealing with their own cultural difficulties, conflicts, but also having to work together and lead a team of people who some of them are going through some of those things themselves and others are locally maybe not recognizing that some of the things, some of the emotional things that come up are actually cultural. And we talked about not everything is cultural, but for them to have a cultural eye on what is happening and put that into the equation. And the feedback that I've had from them is that just the fact that they're more aware of cultural issues has made them pick up certain things and being able to have conversations and has given them a framework that they feel that they are more capable in this situation, both at work and also at home. So that's it, Maya.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Neil. And so I'm hearing from your story a couple of actually many important points that I want to give to those listening as takeaways. And those, if summed up into 4 takeaways, I'm sure there's more, but summing them up, I would say that the first one really is to focus both on the cultural self-awareness as well as understanding the new culture. So when moving and relocating to a new culture, to always begin with what's my cultural lens? What are my cultural glasses? What's the filter that makes me interpret the world and those around me in a specific way, both at work and outside it? I would also say that we spoke about Brazilians and Portuguese, and also the importance that even in seemingly similar cultures, and actually even more so, there is this need to have the cultural lens, as you said, Neil, and to make sure that the understanding of even these small cultural differences is given attention, right? Support the whole family. This is what you have mentioned as well, Neil. This is crucial. We know that relocating international talent is costly, and one of the main reasons why things may not work out and why international assignees move back prematurely is because of family not being able to integrate or having difficulties in the new culture. And you can just imagine, like you said, Neil, someone coming into work and not being able to be fully focused on their work if things are happening in the family. And the last one, which is easy to forget, and this is something we didn't cover in your story, Paul, but Neil, but it's extremely important that not to forget when the international assignees are returning home. This is something we find that clients, the organizations we work with, are not giving enough attention because you've invested a lot in an international assignee going abroad, and to harness, let's say, to reap the benefits of their experience while away when they come back home is crucial. But we see that in a lot of cases, in a high percentage, the employees who return to their country of origin will within 1 year's time leave their current employer. That's a very common situation. And so for organization's sake, as well as for the international assignees' sake, make sure you don't forget the returning home. You also talked, Neil, about the importance that everybody takes a responsibility to make the intercultural and intracultural work. And this is what we'll be looking at in the next story. So we heard the perspective of the people moving, but as I said, you mentioned the importance of the receiving employees and everybody in the team, including managers, to have this cultural filter and become aware of the importance of intercultural competence. So this is what our next story is all about. I'm going to hand it over to our colleague, Annika. Over to you.
Yes, hello. So, sorry, I'm Annika, and I am based in Sweden, working for BBI since 10 years. But having worked with intercultural awareness and awareness of gaps for the last 25 years, and I'm getting more and more thoroughly convinced that with the awareness of these intercultural gaps, we have a powerful tool of improving communication and leadership. And this is everybody's responsibility to work with and to be aware of. I will be sharing an example of what I'm typically working with in the Swedish environment and market, but I think it's relevant for anyone. A typical contact that I'm getting now from this specific case, but also on a daily basis almost from clients, if you can change the slide, Maya, is we have to get them to understand the Swedish way of working, or not even the Swedish way of working, but our way of working. That is what often comes up when, as in this case, we have a client that is, because the ownership is also important. Here we have a Swedish ownership. We have, you can change the slide, yes, a company, a tech company in this case, recruiting people from all over the world because there is a lack of talent in Sweden. Recruiting people from, yes, all over the world, including India, including the US, including people from Europe, and many people from the Middle East. Many people are also second or third generation immigrants in Sweden, of course, with another cultural background. This company, as many other companies, are quite young. I mean, both in how long they've existed, but also in their mix of people. Quite young, quite international, quite hot, not thinking they need intercultural competence because they're all international, speaking fantastic English. This particular company has then clients that are based in Germany, US, and the UK, and in many other countries, of course. And they all talk about agile leadership and agile communication. Now, why do they contact us? That's a good question. Yeah, because we need to train people who we are recruiting coming from other countries to understand our way of working. And the question then is, and we will come back to that, what is our way of working? Is it a Swedish way of working? Is it an international way of working? That's a good question. When they're contacting us, one of the biggest things that they will talk about is the word accountability or responsibility or own initiative. We feel that the people we are recruiting are saying they will be accountable or take responsibility, but they are not. There are challenges in peer evaluations being given because some people don't want evaluations or feedback from a peer. They want it from a manager. And here we want them to be able to give it to each other on a peer level. There are challenges with sometimes people feeling offended because someone, could be German or other cultures, are very direct and seem to be quite rude. And challenges around leadership, issues in how decision making is being made or not. So can we train the people that we are recruiting who are quite new into this environment? That is the question that I very often get. And my question back to the company is then, what is your way of working? Yeah, but we're quite international, is the answer from the company in question. And as I said, I have many similar examples. Okay, so what do you mean when you say our way of working? Well, we mean in consensus, we all make decisions together. We have no hierarchies, no levels in our company. And we want people to take responsibility and to do things on their own without having to control, without having to have too much visibility. The accountability is on the people that we recruit. Okay, I would say to this client, but maybe that's a very Swedish way of talking about these things. And maybe the word accountability could be understood in different ways than we thought it should be understood. So if you move to the next slide, Maya. This is what I'm talking about a lot, not just with Swedish companies, but with companies that have different ownerships. Am I saying that we are all, coming back to Neil, talking about a majority culture or talking about being international, or how do we talk about cultures and how they matter in terms of our communication? I'm convinced that we are coming with cultural lenses, like Maya said. If we are born in Sweden, we will learn to talk to our teachers when we are 13 months in saying, "Hey, Maya." In most other cultures, you would say to your teacher, "Good morning, teacher. Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mrs. Birch." And this is where it starts. How do we greet our teachers? How do we learn to communicate? How do we learn to trust? And if we look at this value map, which is not something I will go into, but we have cultures that are more formed by lack of wars or by a very strong welfare, a strong trust in state, or cultures where survival matters. It's all about keeping a job or having a job, and it's all about trusting and depending on your family for survival. That's where you get your security. Sweden is a culture where, and we can only look at the COVID strategies, where Sweden was different from the rest of the world, where we trust the state. We trust the authorities, and the authorities trust us. You stay at home. We recommend you stay at home if you feel sick. We don't need control. We don't need a strong hierarchy with control like you do in many other cultures. And this is not about right or wrong. This is not about saying that all Swedes are like this and all Germans are like that. But I'm talking very much about the fact that we may be wearing glasses. And coming back to this company in question that I'm talking about, it was very, very clear that the company strategy, the company values, and everything related to communication and leadership in this company is coming through very Swedish lenses. And if we want to recruit people, maybe we need to be aware of those lenses and about how they might be understood, and what and to learn about, well, based on self-awareness, to be able to communicate to the people we recruit. We want you to actually work and understand the Swedish way, or do we need to think in a different way? Because the question started and was with the company in question, maybe we need to adapt more because our clients are not Swedish, they are German or they're American. Maybe we need to work with this gap. And so the self-awareness, like you said also, Neil, is everybody's responsibility. And how do we find the middle way? And what do we need to do, all of us, to become a truly international company? The training that was, the question from the company was to train people we hire who are not Swedish. what happened and how we have been working with this company is not training the people we are hiring, but training all the leaders in our company, Swedish or non-Swedish, but leaders, in what are our company values? What do they mean? How do we need to communicate them? And the big question in this company is, are we a Swedish company and need to be more clear about that? Or are we international, and what does that mean? We started with one leadership day for a group of leaders, and we have now done almost 20 days of leadership trainings, because the reactions in these trainings have been, and the focus have been, on self-awareness, not talking about other cultures specifically, but talking about our own. And of course, everybody involved in the trainings need to reflect on, what do my lenses and what does my communication based on that look like? And so we have had in-depth discussions and working with, maybe more things are connected to culture than we thought. Maybe we are not that international, not so international as we thought, because we thought having traveled or speaking English is enough. To really discuss how are our company values understood, and what do we need to do to make them maybe be better understood, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah, the outcomes is, again, then a much greater understanding, some definite changes in communication and company policies, and actually reflecting on, now that we are working with this client from Germany or from China or from the US, how do we need to adjust and adapt our communication? This is never about changing, but what kind of tools do we need to consider when working with a very direct culture? And how do we even react? What kind of words do we need to use? To really take the initial understanding into something very concrete and adapting your communication. And that's not something that we easily do, because most people would say, this was fun, this was interesting, I understand how strange I am, but I will not do anything with it. And for me, the purpose is walking out of the training saying, I'll try and test something. And so this company is going on talking about the value of this awareness, trying to change some things based on this, trying to make, so the whole leadership is now aware of the challenges. We are now working with the presentation of the company values. How do we communicate? And also discussing again, what are we? Are we an international company? Are we a Swedish company? And thinking about this in a strategic manner. I think that's what we have on the next slide also, Maya. One thing is talking about cross-cultural differences when we, like in your example, Neil, when we have expats moving in and out, then we are sometimes more open to work with the cross-cultural differences in terms of onboarding. To me, we have a bigger challenge and a more sensitive challenge in terms of our international companies, where we have a lot of immigration. Many of our people are coming from a second or a third generation, you know, having moved to Sweden or to France or to another culture. And very often in multicultural companies, there is a fear of addressing cultural differences. And that is something that needs to change, because we need to have the courage and not to be afraid of talking about the cultural differences, because this is not about saying you are wrong, I'm right. This is not to say this is, you know, this is good or this is bad. This is just talking about our cultural lenses and the fact that we tend to misunderstand and make judgments based on that. this is basic communication, we could think, but that's where it starts. I speak Swedish English. We have German English. We have French English. We have Danish English. And the words don't mean the same thing. Open does not mean the same thing all over the world. The word inclusion that we want to have in our diversity and inclusion policies, what does the word inclusion mean? And when and how do we feel included? These are questions you need to address based on the cultural differences. To demand responsibility from all employees to adapt. Like you said, Neil, we can only do that if we have talked about what the differences look like and what our cultural lenses look like. Then we can start saying, we require all our employees to actually reflect on this and to take responsibility for their cultural competence. How do I react? How do I communicate? How do I adjust my communication based on this? And to talk through, of course, company values. Yeah, we are international. We have very strong company culture. Of course we do. But IKEA is very Swedish in Sweden and more German in Germany. So even IKEA, we know has a strong company culture, will be a Swedish company all over the world. But the local interpretations will be more German, more French, or more Swedish than we think sometimes. I'm very passionate about this, so I might sound a bit black and white. But I know that this is very important, and this releases a lot of tension when you start talking about the cultural differences to approach very sensitive issues sometimes.
Thank you, Annika. And thank you for those important tips and takeaways. And I think one thing that I think that everybody hears and understands is to have that courage, right? To have the courage to talk about the cultural lens, which is one of many lenses that we have, but one that is has a strong influence and needs to be taken into consideration. So thank you for those takeaways. I hope they were as useful to all of you listening as they were to me. Now on to our next story, where we will look at these same questions, but from a wider perspective and looking at how a whole organization can, let's say, make room for cultural diversity and how the HR, the human resources, play an important role in all of this. So with that, Sonsoles, I leave the microphone to you.
Thank you, Maya. Pleasure to be here. Yes, indeed, I've been working on this topic for over 25 years with 150 nationalities, 25 different countries, and I'm increasingly more convinced that without the intercultural competence, we are missing a great deal of opportunities. So what we are going to share today is the story of a large company. Just to give you an idea, you have a short profile here in the next slide. Only in their home country, they hire over 20,000 people every year. Okay, and they're present across 5 continents, 33 plus countries, and a few more coming up very soon. So the challenge here, we've been doing a number of things with them. One of them was, of course, something that has been shared already, to support expats in their relocation, and to also explain and deep dive into local cultures to give people a hint on what to expect and what to avoid. But today we're going to share an experience with the HR team. The headquarters has a number of people dedicated to organize what the HR policies are across the different locations. And as you can imagine, the classical fracture between headquarters and the local affiliates and the different countries may be expanded and emphasized, or we can bridge that gap with this program that we're going to show you some highlights about, based on developing the intercultural competence. And this is what we try to do. So we try to, and I think we did successfully help them reflect upon the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and strategies with this new lens. It's not about changing everything they've done so far. It's about adding a new layer of complexity in this fast-paced world, so that they could be more efficiently approaching their goals. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is just a hint on the kind of activities that we did together with them. We were working because of location on as a webinar. It was not face-to-face in this case. It was virtual training, and some of these activities that we do, of course, these text balloons were movable in the whiteboard, and we were playing around with them, and this sparked some interesting conversation about what's more intercultural, the confusion in the one that says here, I know there are differences, but I'm not sure what's the best way. Is that better than the golden rule, treating others as we want to be treated ourselves? This is the idea of the connection, or how to connect the dots between inclusion and the intercultural competence. Because as you can also imagine, this moved us into expanding the outlook, the outreach of this program, into applying this to their own corporate culture. So we use the cultural iceberg, but they did apply this to their own corporate culture. And there were some eye-opening moments where they realized, that's why I cannot get things done, because I thought this was out in plain sight, but it was actually hiding. It was underneath the surface. Okay, so this is just to give you a glimpse of the kind of activities that we do together, and we try to keep it as interactive as possible. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just share one part of the last step that we took together. Like I said at the beginning, the purpose of this program was to co-create a new DEI strategy that added the cultural lens to it. So we just took one of the things that we did, and this also was, sparked also a great conversation about what are the main moments, what are the checkpoints where along the employee life cycle or the employee journey, where we most need right now to apply this lens, because it's impossible to, we don't want to overspread ourselves. We cannot do everything at once, but there were some key defining moments. So for example, along this wheel that I'm sure many of you are familiar with if you work in HR or with talent and cultural departments, we stopped, for example, at the selection, the first step, the job description. And as you know, some cultures are more comfortable with the language of contribution than with the language of competition. So it was not only a matter of translating the job description or the job offer into a local language, which was not, by the way, the case in every geographic location. They were in English, but not yet in local languages across the world. But it's also about, the actual meaning, the hidden part of that iceberg, that cultural iceberg. What does it mean? Who am I turning away unconsciously by describing the duties, the responsibilities in one way or a different one? This is just an example of what we did, and like my colleagues have said before, Annika and Neil, it's about a global focus with a local adaptation. And that is also a cycle. That's something that is not set on stone. So keeping those conversations open and keeping those dialogues alive, that is the main contribution that I would say, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, that we do when we work with organizations. And just to give you another example of the kind of interactive online work that we did, thank you, Maya. we play around with post-its, and they have, of course, as you can imagine, different perspectives, because whoever works on compensation and benefits, has their own idea of what needs to be tackled, as opposed to somebody working on training and development, learning and development, or etc. So that's also the idea when we work with with natural teams, with the whole corporate HR team, to have them communicate among themselves as well, and to create a safe space where they can have a conversation that's meaningful to achieve their current strategic goals, which tend to be high level, but need to be materialized into something concrete, and to be consistent also across the different geographies. So I'm just going to share in the next slide a few of the outcomes of these exercises, based on this play, stop, start dynamic that many of you are familiar with as well. So going beyond the translation and the maturity level of the organizations. When you grow based on acquisitions, you tend to acquire different types of corporate cultures. So whether it is a family-owned company or it was previously owned by a multinational, that creates a unique set of challenges that need to be addressed. So going beyond the geographical location and trying to understand what's needed, that's also part of the benefit of intercultural competence. That is a catalyst for corporate transformation. One of the initiatives that they committed to put in practice as a result of our intervention was to start business resource groups in the diversity and inclusion strategy. As you know, we have affinity groups that are now called business resource groups because they include not only employees but also other stakeholders like suppliers, etc. So that's one thing that they've been wanting to do for a long time, and I think this was the last push that was needed. And in terms of what they already do well, of course, we always want to leverage their strengths. So it's about constructive challenging of their practices, their policies, and oftentimes it's about using those strengths to add new policies and new strategies, or to adapt. And finally, if I can share what I think was a big outcome, I would say that connecting to the topic of this Intercultural Academy previous workshop on staying ahead in today's world, I would say that it's about future-proofing the organization. Okay, the co-creation of this new D&I strategy is about being ready for this world where everything changes so fast that unless we are agile, we're missing chances. And intercultural competence is just one tool that we can use. And the outcome was extremely positive, and people were saying that they became comfortable during the program because we were able to rehearse conversations that they were long needed in the countries, in the affiliates, and within headquarters as well. So that's what I would highlight, Maya, trying to be very, very, very respectful with time, and also to allow also for your Q&A, which is probably the best part of this webinar, what you have to ask. And Maya, back to you.
Thank you, Sonsoles. Really interesting to get an insight into not just the outcomes, but how you got there as well, and those interactive parts of the training program that are done both when we meet our participants and clients face to face, but also online in various formats. So if I were to try to summarize some of the tips and the takeaways to give to the people who are listening, 4 things that come to mind are, as you said, Sonsoles, make sure to consider culture as much as language. So a translation is not just a linguistic one, it's a cultural one as well. And challenge internal procedures and processes, and be courageous enough to take on that increased complexity of another lens to look through, which is the cultural in this context. Now, you mentioned they're getting the input from the local affiliates, and the cycle of headquarters, local, and that's an ongoing thing. So make sure those communication channels are there and open, right? And that there's a willingness to listen from both ends. And to continuously develop and learn. And in this context, meaning continuously developing that intercultural learning and the development of intercultural competence. Perfect, thank you. What does ERG and BRG mean is a question in the chat. Sonsoles, you mentioned these terms, ERG and BRG, employee or business resource group. Perfect. We've had 3 stories, and I'm going to leave room for questions, but I wanted to really just to sum up after hearing these 3 stories of what are, from our experience at BBI Communication, the 5 steps, let's say, whether you are leading a diverse team, relocating to Portugal, or working in international organizations. 5 steps that we will always incorporate in the support to our clients are these. So starting with self-awareness, becoming aware of these cultural glasses or lenses. You've heard many of us mention that term throughout today's webinar. Becoming aware of your cultural biases as well. And number 2, really recognizing and understanding and acknowledging cultural diversity, having the courage to look at it. And then to look at what might be different and what might be similar between your and the other culture, and to create the bridges between that. And all of this within, and now I'm at point 4, within a shared framework with shared structures and policies and processes where you make room for cultural diversity, but within a shared space. And only then, at least this is our experience, you get to number 5, which is where you can actually start benefiting from having this multitude of cultural perspectives. But it doesn't come automatically. That's what we're saying. It requires quite a lot of reflection, self-awareness, and a lot of hard work, which is ongoing, right? That's the summary from my part. And now is the time with 6 minutes to go that I open up the floor for questions. Any questions in the chat? Any questions that have come up as you've heard the speakers speak, except for the ERG that we solved? Any other questions that those of you listening have after hearing our 3 speakers? You can write in the chat, or you can even raise your hand and use the microphone. Good question coming up in the chat. Now, we have a question asking, how are we able to reach the companies that are actually in denial of cultural differences? How do we reach the companies that that are not wanting, for one reason or another, to acknowledge the cultural diversity and the differences? I asked this question to Annika, Sonsoles, or Neil, anyone who wants to chip in on answering the question, how can we reach clients that are in denial of differences?
Two things come to mind. One is similar to the same, same logical argument we use when we sell any learning or development process, whether that may be executive coaching, training, etc. We say, if you think this is expensive, how is it going with ignoring? So typically I would conduct a post-mortem analysis and say, okay, can we look back at the things that you wish to change, the things that you're not happy about, And can we just work together and see if there's a possibility that there may be a reason that's linked to cultural competence? Okay, so we have to build the business case together with them, and slowly but surely. Some organizations are more responsive to fear of making a mistake, fear of competition, fear of, or they just don't want to lag behind their competitors or their, any other organization that they admire. And others are more responsive to positive language, like curiosity. What is it that you are missing out? This is an interesting ride, a fun ride, a positive one. But I would say building the business case together, using their own examples, interviewing their people, and creating a safe space so that they feel you're not just selling something to them, but you are truly invested in their success.
That's a really good answer. And the post-mortem, if you're interested in knowing more about that, Sonsoles can tell you more about it after the webinar. But it's kind of looking back at what if we found ourselves in this worst case scenario, looking back, what could we have done differently? And I think, Sonsoles, some of the comments you made as well is an answer to the question we had in the chat on how might you increase and create excitement for multicultural environments. Really highlighting those benefits, the fun ride that you're in for, and all the benefits that is too long to list here that come with the cultural diversity. We have another question in the chat. I'll take that as the last one to make sure we finish on time. Do you also incorporate coaching trajectories after for individual employees? Yes, we do that. Usually what will happen is that we will start with a training program, and then that will continue over a long term with coaching for key roles, and then mixing that up with meeting in group settings as well. So yeah, we do mix consultancy, training, and coaching of developing intercultural competence at BBI. So working with individuals, groups, leaders, international SMEs, their families, etc. So quite a big crowd that we're fortunate enough to work with. I am wary of the minutes that we have left, and I wanted to leave you with a couple of things before you leave. We are running something we call the Intercultural Academy. This is where we have workshops on set dates, open for individual registration. So normally we will do in-company trainings, that's our main focus, but we do run these regular 3-hour-long workshops open for individual registration. We have the next one coming up on the 26th of October, which is about communicating effectively across cultures. There will be a small group, interactive group of people from different companies, different countries. If you would like to sign up for this, we are offering a special price for you. We're having a 10% discount off in connection with this webinar. So anyone who registers this week, whether it's yourself or your colleagues, will get that 10% discount. And then the other thing that I want to let you know of is that in this series of webinars, we have 2 more upcoming webinars in November. On the 9th and on the 30th, we'll be looking at how culture impacts language, and we will be making stronger connection and following the conversations we've had today, and making the stronger connection between intercultural competence and DE&I. And that'll be the last webinar in the series. If you're not registered yet, do so on our website. These are 1-hour free webinars. And with that, we've reached 11 o'clock, and I thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers for sharing your stories, and we hope to see all of you soon.